New Orleans partially reopened businesses over the weekend in phase one of the city's reopening plan. Restaurants, gyms, salons, and movie theaters are now open with limited capacity, 2 months after Mayor Latoya Central signed a stay-at-home order. Councilman Joseph Giarrusso of New Orleans District A is with us. Councilman, welcome to the show. We're so excited to talk to you. Thank you for coming on. So on the onset of this pandemic, many criticized New Orleans, a lot of the local officials there, including the mayors, for not canceling Mardi Gras, which of course brings millions of people from all over the world to that city, not to mention the huge economic effect that Mardi Gras brings to New Orleans. How has your city recovered in the weeks since?
Well, I think the good news is because the shutdown occurred so quickly after Mardi Gras, we saw that spike within the first 3 to 4 weeks, and we hit that peak in a pretty early time. So now we're on the downside of that. It's been a solid 14 to 21 days where we've really had very limited new cases. And thankfully, that is what is allowing us now as we look at the medical evidence coming from Johns Hopkins, from associations like AEI, to be able to reopen the city. Of course, the problem for all cities, and I think for states too, is the fact that so much of this is driven by sales tax and getting people to spend money where they are, particularly for cities like Las Vegas or New Orleans or Orlando. It's even more magnified when we know that we rely on tourists to be such a big part of our economy. I'll just give you one small statistic. We know that about 19% of the visitors here fly into the city, but according to the paper this morning, they spend about 34% of the sales tax that we collect from visitors. So it's a significant amount that is collected from people who come to visit the city, not just from the region, but also by air.
No, sure, that's a huge chunk. And we know your district partially reopened over the weekend. In your opinion, Councilman, what will it take to get back to the New Orleans that all of us once knew?
I think we're going to have to get all the medical pieces in place. Number one, I think number two, we got to make sure that we know that people are safe. That's really the most important aspect of all of it. And number three, there has to be the requisite medical care and confidence for people to be able to travel. I think that's really the biggest issue that we're facing right now is that people, myself included, aren't wild about getting on airplanes or traveling places unnecessarily. So until either we reach that vaccine point, the phases have gotten so far down, or we've reached herd immunity, I really don't see a lot of necessarily large scale travel. Hopefully, the good news will be as we enter those phases incrementally over the next couple of weeks, people will start to build that confidence again. And you have to give our tourism people credit here. They're trying to focus first locally, get people from the surrounding region into the city, and then we'll focus more on trying to get people from outside.
You mentioned this a moment ago, but New Orleans went from hundreds of cases a day to just about 20 a day in the past month. No deaths reported over the last 2 days in New Orleans. So the trend is down. However, is the city prepared for a resurgence?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's what everybody's focused on right now. And frankly, for all of us who are concerned about phase one reopening, that is the biggest issue right now is making sure that people continue to take care and have the care necessary that they need. So it's describing to businesses what they need to do. Make sure people are outside as much as possible. Make sure that you have the sanitizer. Make sure that people are sanitizing in the way that they should in their businesses too. The hard part is that New Orleans is known as a place to have fun and a party town. And of course, the literature and all of the anecdotes are showing that being in tight spaces, particularly in bars, is a really tough spot to be in. So, what can we do to start making sure, particularly for people who live here first and for people who are nearby, that can come in, enjoy the city, and shop, but then making sure also that we're doing our part to protect our people?
I want to expand a little bit more on the people in your district and in New Orleans. Food insecurity, as you know, has been devastating folks across the country, not just in your state. But there was a high volume of restaurant workers that left without jobs in New Orleans. So, what is the city doing to help those in need, specifically in your district, Councilman?
That's a great question. So the last report I saw is that nearly 25% of all New Orleanians were laid off. And you consider the national numbers of nearly 36 million people who filed for unemployment, it's pretty impressive. So a couple of things. Number one is obviously we're really working hard on doing something called food pantries, which is providing food to people who need it. We had one this morning, and we've given out almost 90,000 pounds of food to about 700, 750 different cars in a short period of time. So for those are for people who don't have access to it. Other local schools and institutions are doing the same thing. And of course, now that we're entering the summertime, the biggest issue is making sure that people remain fed then as well. And then I think the final piece that we're really trying to study, you sort of mentioned this, is that we're based on a gig and a service industry economy. How do we work with those industries locally to start pivoting people to jobs that not only pay more, but that can maybe be done more remotely? So we're working in tandem to make that happen, and that's really a lot of the conversations we're beginning to have now as we reemerge.
And before I let you go, Councilman, what would phase two of reopening look like in New Orleans, and what precautions do you have for the people in your district?
Yeah, the biggest precautions we have for people in District A, which is really sort of more residential, is telling people if you don't need to go places, don't do it. If you're going to go to a restaurant, go with your immediate family. Make sure that you're being safe. And I think what we need to see is these numbers continue to either bend downwards or plateau for where they are, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about opening up to that next level. But until you see the numbers and make sure for a really solid 2 to 3 weeks that you're in good shape, it's premature to start talking about what the next level looks like. But as we get there, we want to make sure we're following the data and protecting people as best as possible. At the same time, making sure we're trying to get our businesses back on some footing again, too.
All right, Councilman Joseph Giarrusso of New Orleans District A. Pleasure talking to you, Councilman. Stay safe. Thank you so much for being on.